When I was in college, I took a few writing classes. And in one of those writing classes, the very first one, the first thing that they taught us was to never, ever, under any circumstances, switch the perspective of your writing. Now, there was a reason for why they forced us into this, because they wanted us to stick to either the first person or the third person for our writing. They believed that when you switch perspectives too much, it messes with your ability to keep that straight, and it messes with the reader's ability to follow what you write. But there was another secondary reason that my teacher gave after the lecture. She said, essentially the reason you want to not switch perspectives when you write a story is because it's just really hard to do that in any sort of convincing way to your audience. It's just flat out hard to do. Plenty of authors do it, but we need to learn the rules of writing before we learn how to break the rules. And most stories don't really shift perspective all that much either. Think of To Kill a Mockingbird. It's one of the most famous books ever written through the perspective of one character. It's great because that book is so much easier to follow, and as a reader, your expectations don't really shift or change. Think of Harry Potter as well. The whole series is essentially taken from the perspective of Harry, with the exception of a few chapters, like the Other Minister chapter or Spinner's End chapter. Mainly, we stay in Harry's head. And Rowling does a great job with this, even to the point where at the end she keeps us in Harry's head but takes us out of it for the last chapter so that we can experience the information as Harry reveals it to Voldemort. It's a brilliant bit of writing, to be honest, but it's massively difficult to do. One of my favorite novels of all time is The Poisonwood Bible. Now, this is a story about a family who moves to the Congo and their life and experience there. It's told through the perspective of 5 characters. The mother, and then her 4 daughters. And Barbara Kingsolver, the author, once told an interviewer that she wrote each of the stories in that specific chapter through all 4 perspectives of the girls, and just chose the best one of the group to actually put in the book. But one of the reasons I marvel at the book, and one of the reasons why it's my absolute favorite, is because of how she really puts you in the mind of the characters. And how each chapter is written differently because the girl is telling you the story, and each of those characters are different and need to have different voices. This is the ultimate difficult thing to do when writing perspective shifts. Because a good author can shift perspectives for the purpose of the story and the plot, but a great author can shift the perspective so well that the whole writing style changes drastically, but the author still maintains their style so that you're not totally drowned and thrown out of the story. And I think JRR Tolkien does this better than most authors, maybe anyone that I've ever read. And before I go into more, make sure you like the video and subscribe. Sorry if you're getting annoyed with me for saying this all the time, but I gotta remind you. I'm going through Lord of the Rings for the first time. I'm publishing video essays of my thoughts, so go check out the channel and subscribe if you're into that sort of thing. You can also become a member for members-only content and early access to videos, and you can also donate to a specific video if you like. But anyway, I think the idea of perspective shifting is one of the most difficult things to do convincingly. But Tolkien seems to be a professional at it, even in the few short pages that I've read in this book. I think the first time I really noticed this was during the Council of Elrond in that chapter, when each person was giving their tale. It wasn't just that they were each telling their story, but the actual language and the things that they said changed along with it. So even if you didn't have the dialogue tags in the whole entire Council of Elrond, you'd kind of still be able to tell who spoke based off the language that they used. But when I read that chapter, it didn't fully register with me how good he was at doing this until I got to the beginning of Two Towers. And now we got the first chapter from Aragorn's perspective, and then shifted into Pippin's for the third. And as soon as we hit the third, it felt like the whole tone and style of writing changed to show that a new person was telling their story. In the first 2 chapters, when we get Aragorn's perspective, the first chapter is essentially a decision that Aragorn is making, and there are sections that you feel a bit discombobulated because Aragorn is a bit stressed making the decision to either go chase Merry and Pippin or Frodo and Sam. But then you hit the moment he makes his decision, and the whole chapter was organized and told extremely clearly. And I actually think The Riders of Rohan was one of my favorite chapters in the whole thing because you saw the clarity and conviction not only in the mind of Aragorn, but in the writing itself. So even though their hope was fading, there was still clarity in the mind of Aragorn for what he needed to do. If that chapter had any confusion, it was only the moment where Legolas smelled the green earth and got rejuvenated, and that it was kind of just like Legolas as a weird but cool elf. It wasn't really explained. But everything else in this chapter felt like a log of a military journal. It felt like they were moving from place to place, and it was recorded clear. And the times they slept, and the times they rested, and the times that they chased, and the decisions that they made, everything was laid out linearly, and just like a ranger was making a log of all his, entries for that day. And again, because of the clarity and the words of the chapter, you also feel the clarity of Aragorn's decisions. Even if he is unsure, we just feel like another member of this group, listening to the leadership of Aragorn as he figures it out in his mind. But all the while, the writing isn't formulaic or even boring. The whole mystery of this chapter, where you don't know if the hobbits are alive or are dead, is kind of what keeps you turning from page to page. But then all the decisions that Aragorn makes are what keep this chapter clean and organized, which I love. Compare this to the third chapter, which is called the Uruk-hai. I have never been in more confusion mapping out a chapter in my head than I have been for this chapter. I didn't know how many groups of orcs or goblins or Uruk-hai there were, or any other creatures that were there. I didn't know the makeup of this company. It was so confusing to me. I didn't know where they were on a map with any amount of detail. I didn't know who or what was chasing the group, or if they were even going to make it. I know some orcs left the group for a bit, but where did they go, and why did they really come back? I know even Merry and Pippin had a moment at the end of this chapter where they kind of ran away into the forest and watched the battle a bit from afar, but their location and the health status of both of them were kind of up in the air. I didn't feel like I knew anything definitively in this chapter. And sometimes I would chalk that up to just a chapter being poorly written. But no, not in this chapter. I think this bears the similar resemblance to the Old Forest chapter, in which I talked about the fact that the copious detail that Tolkien wrote was a bit annoying, and it made me feel lost in a forest, just as the group was lost in a forest. And so this chapter bears a similar resemblance to that chapter, in which Pippin doesn't know anything that's going on. So in order for us to understand what is going on through his perspective, the form needs to match the function of the writing. And I have to be a bit confused as he is confused. I have to question where the orcs are going. I have to question how many companies of orcs there are, where they are all from, and if any of them want to kill me. I have to be slightly confused of all the names and only really know the names if one of the characters speaks the name. I essentially just have to be left in the dark and fill in the details as the details come to me, just like Pippin was doing. So I found this chapter brilliant after reading it, because it felt so unsettling and it felt so chaotic after I finished it. It didn't feel like I had any resolve, even though they were apparently safe in Fangorn Forest. All the filler words that Tolkien used were the words like apparently or evidently, and words that just show that the narrator is unsure of the things that are happening as well. And so if this chapter is told through any sort of omniscient perspective, you miss some of the more brilliant aspects to his writing. Take for example this paragraph in this chapter. They turned and walked side by side, slowly along the line of the river. Behind them, the light grew in the east. As they walked, they compared notes, talking lightly in hobbit fashion, of the things that had happened since their capture. No listener would have guessed from their words that they had suffered cruelly and been in dire peril, going without hope toward torment and death, or that even now, as they knew well, they had little chance of ever finding friend or safety again. Now, I wanted to talk about this in a whole different essay too, but I think the point kind of fits here, in that there is a distinct culture that influences the way that you speak and communicate. Even the hobbits' journeys, the peril seems grave, but it didn't seem like it was weighing down on you. The hobbits, I guess, are just kind of able to bounce back quickly from traumatic events that happen in their lives. Just like the fact of Merry and Pippin that are speaking lightly in hobbit fashion here, speak to the change of voice in this chapter. It was dark and depressing and scary in this whole chapter, but it ends on such a positive note because the perspective of Merry and Pippin is just so high, and not only in their attitude, but in their speech as well. And I kind of find the perspective shifts, while they are a bit jarring at times, are brilliantly written, because Tolkien knows that in order to make a convincing perspective shift, and in order to inhabit the mind of another character, the tone and the voice, and especially the mood of the chapter also needs to change. And I'm excited to keep reading because I know we're going to get into the mind of Frodo a little bit later. And I think I've found no better example of this tonal shift in Tolkien's writing than in chapter 2 to chapter 3 of The Two Towers. But let me know what you think too, because I feel like I've just kind of been finding this all over the place on Tolkien's writing, just like the different voices of each character. So if you have anything to add or you want to kind of talk about the writing of Tolkien and how he shifts perspectives, I'd love to learn more about this because you guys are kind of some of the experts here. So make sure you just let me know in the comments below. Make sure you like the video and subscribe and become a member, and I'll see you in the next one.